Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Goldfarb, and I think we're going to switch over to this, Metahumans and KineFX. So this presentation was created by Peter and myself pretty recently, about a month ago, and it kind of demonstrates what the education department does at SideFX, or part of what we do is that this was a reaction to a number of questions and a number of conversations that we've had with instructors who are new to KineFX because it's a relatively new bit of technology in Houdini, new to MetaHumans, maybe they haven't even done more than look at a video on YouTube or something, but they're getting questions from their students. Their students want to use these really high-end assets that we'll look at in a minute in their work. And we thought, Peter and I said, well, we don't really know how to do any of that, so we should discover it. We should try and bring something together that we can at least present to our instructors so that they can get a little foothold in this workflow. So you can think of this as kind of a version 1 of an ongoing workflow, because KineFX is updating with every release in big ways. MetaHumans is really new, and we know for a fact that they're bringing out even more stuff with 5.1, I think. Obviously, it's something that Epic is going to continue with. So what are the goals then of this presentation? We're going to export a MetaHuman from Unreal. We're going to use the KineFX tools within Houdini to loop some mocap animation. We're going to do a Ragdoll simulation on that skeleton, and you drive the MetaHuman with that. And then we're going to take those skeletal animations, bring them back into Unreal, and drive the MetaHuman. So it seems a very simple kind of round trip. But do you know how to do it? We didn't a few weeks ago. And there are some little details that you might not know about that we want to show you here. So to begin with, what is KineFX? And you can read the slide there if you want, but basically KineFX is Houdini's rigging and animation toolset from 18.5 going forward. And it completely replaces the object level workflow that we've had for 20 plus years that people have done big projects on. I've done a feature film using the object-based workflow, but KineFX is joint-based, and the joints are in fact within Houdini points that have a couple of special attributes, and that allows them to be used in this kind of hierarchical system. The benefit of that for anyone who's used Houdini is that if you have points, you can do anything. And that means that you can do anything with a rig and a character. And that opens up a gigantic range of all kinds of tomfoolery that you wouldn't have had with the object workflow. And it's super fast. It's really, really fast. And there'll be updates. There were updates in 19.5, and next year in Houdini 20, there's going to be a big whack of updates. So it's a really exciting set of tools that are only going to grow to fill out the entire animation workflow in Houdini. MetaHumans are also relatively new. I think maybe last year they were a beta. Now they're a sort of a full feature. And they're essentially what are described as highly realistic human characters. There is a MetaHuman creator, I think it's called, that you can use, MetaHuman creator. And it's essentially like Poser or MakeHuman, or there's lots of character creators that you might find at the beginning of a game when you're creating your avatar. So you have a limited range of sliders and clothing options. And the people at Epic and 3Lateral, are the companies that are primarily behind this, are going to flesh that out more and more. And so 5 years from now, there might be hundreds of different kinds of clothing and accessories. Accessories is one of the things that they don't quite do right now. Like, you can't put glasses on your characters, but that's an update that's going to be coming very soon. So we're already seeing this in probably in-game, maybe, but people have done cinematics, lots of little tests online. I think the Matrix project that Unreal did used MetaHumans. So really robust, and these are really high quality characters. And in the creator, they've built, I think, 50 or so that are just, there you go, here they are. So, to begin with, we're going to look at kind of a high level how to set up a project and put a MetaHuman into Unreal and then export that as FBX. So here we're starting with just a blank setup, and we're going to use, we're pointing and clicking a lot here, so bear with me. But essentially, we're creating a bare project just to start nice and clean and fresh. Create. And then we're going to use the Quixel Bridge, which is going to allow us to access the assets that we have within Bridge. And there's a MetaHuman section. And so you can see here are a whole bunch of the characters that are pre-made. And you can select each of those and you can then edit them. So you can modify, you can make their head bigger or put different clothes on them. So we're going to use Ada and click. This all happens online in the cloud, so it can be really fast or it can be really slow depending on, I guess, where you live. And then once you've done this through Quixel Bridge, it imports it. You can probably see behind there, it's in your scene now. And you may have to like restart to make sure the plugins work. But now we have this blueprint. I think we're going to call it Ada or something. I can't read that. What are we doing? No, I can't read that either. But Ada is in our scene now. And you can see, what is that? Oh, it's the floor. We're lowering the floor to the ground. And we're going to put Ada in the center of our scene. So she's right in the center on the ground, just as a placeholder so that she's in a good position. I think there she is, yeah. So we're going to drag her just into the viewport like that, go. And then we can throw her to the center of the world. So she's in a good default position. Now here's kind of the tricky part. I think, yes, next slide. Again. The tricky part here is that this is a blueprint. And blueprints in Unreal can be all kinds of things. And MetaHumans are very much all kinds of things. There's multiple skeletons, multiple meshes, multiple LODs. And so what we need to do is we need to find the base animation skeleton, right? The root skeleton upon which all the animation is sitting. And we can do that. It probably did it really fast. But you can do that through the outliner and then the body, and then you can say, you know, the mesh, and then use the little button, and it'll point you to the content area, and that's what we've selected and we're exporting. So this is the root skeleton. And then we're going to FBX export that, save it to disk. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select the blueprint, the big top-level blueprint, and we're going to do File Export. So now we have two things. We have this base animation skeleton, and we have the big fat blueprint FBX, and that's going to include all the different skeletons and all the different meshes. So I'm going to go through that. And so the reason we're using these two things is because we're going to retarget onto that animation skeleton, but we're going to use the blueprint or a part of that blueprint as a visualization. So, into Houdini. So we have, is that playing? Does it look like it's playing? Oh, I clicked it. There we go. So in this network, we have a whole bunch of stuff. That is the root skeleton, and that's what we want to import our animation onto. We want to retarget animation. Here's the animation. This is a, oh, I've skipped one, but it's okay. What we have, those three nodes there are the blueprint with all the stuff, the animation skeleton, which is just that raw skeleton, and then a Mixamo animation that we just grabbed from Mixamo. And here we're retargeting them. So we're aligning them in terms of their size and basic orientation, making sure the arms are the right, angle. Here we're matching the joints so that, the center of the chest goes to the center of the chest, elbow to elbow. And then this allows, with this mapping, we can give it to the full body IK in just a second. And that full body IK solver is going to take that source animation and drive our target skeleton using the FBIK tools. And this is really brief. There's lots and lots of options here to optimize how that works and how accurate it is. And there's also tools in the video that I skipped about fixing some of that mocap. So if the mocap you bring in, if the feet are a bit jittery or something's gone wrong, we've got a whole suite of tools in the KineFX toolset to clean those up, to plant the feet down. So if your mocap is stuff you've done at home and it's all janky, you can fix it. Mixamo stuff tends to be pretty clean. So having done that, we now have a piece of animation. And I'll just, nope. Right. So now we have our animation. Now we're going to look at our preview mesh. And this is where things get slightly tricky because this is the blueprint export. And it's got a ton of stuff in it, as I've said. There's like 5 spine 1 bones because blueprints, or the blueprint for the metahumans, the base has a spine bone. The shirt has a spine bone. If you have a jacket, that's got a spine bone. So if you have a character with a shirt and a jacket, you have 3 spine bones. So this little network, we're going to chop off the head because we didn't know how to deal with the head. Version 2 of this will incorporate the head. It's a very complex and very powerful system, but we weren't prepared to deal with it. So we're going to get rid of the head elements, and then we're going to unpack this character because it's brought in into a character node that just sort of packs everything together into an efficient set of data. But we're going to unpack it because we want to get access to the capture information. So here are all bones and the meshes and all of that stuff that's all crammed together. And in the next node, which this is probably the only wrangle that we've seen today, the only bit of programming, but it's really straightforward. It's basically a regular expression that just says, hey, there's a bunch of spine 1s here. Get rid of them all and just leave me with 1 spine 1, 1 elbow. Find the collar bones, collar joints, I should say, that were associated with the shirt. But we don't really need that bone, so let's get rid of it, and let's just take the collar and associate it with the neck, because this is just a previs workflow. So what we're doing is we're really reducing the fidelity of this just a little bit, just to make it work, because we don't need to see this as a final renderable thing. And in fact, that violates the terms of service with metahumans. They're intended to be used in Unreal. So we don't need any of this nonsense. And I'm sorry, Peter, this is all Peter's nonsense that he wrote. Don't mean to denigrate it. But you can see that it's fairly simple. We're doing like 6 things, and they're each very simple. And this will need to be adjusted depending on the character. Like this particular character has these kinds of clothes, and so we'll have those kind of bone conflicts. But we're also cleaning up the weights, and then we're repacking it. So we've unpacked it, we're fooling around with the data, and then we're packing that data back up into that efficient package again. Packed. And then I think we blast something. Oh, the blast node there, in a second, we're going to use a name attribute to get rid of all of the LODs except for LOD number 2. We chose that just to be the most representative of this character for this workflow. And that's all beautiful. And I think that's the end of that one. We can move on. So now that we have our animation from our full body IK, we have a joint deform, which takes a mesh a rest skeleton and an animated skeleton. So there's our mesh. Okay. And boink, there we go. So now we're driving that mesh with our animated skeleton referencing our rest position. And so that's exactly what we want to see. And now we have this animation. I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Oh, we're going to export this animation just as skeletal animation to FBX. And the clip name here, we're using the $OS, which is going to give us the name of that node. Export to disk. And we're good. So, bringing skeletal animation into Unreal. Is that going to play? It's not playing. Let me try that one more time. Oh, here we go. Peter did this video. It's really slow. So we're going to make a new folder for our content because we want to bring our animation in an isolated area. And when we import this skeleton, we want to point it, or when we import this animated skeleton, we want to point it to the MetaHuman base skeleton. That's the skeleton that we exported. So that this skeleton that we're bringing in right now, it knows that it should be driving the base skeleton of that MetaHuman, not the coat, not the boots, none of that nonsense, because all of those things within the blueprint are riding on top of that animation skeleton. So now that we have that, we're going to, I think, make a new level sequence. I'm going to name it appropriately. So we go to level sequence, come on. And we name that. And then we're going to go inside that level sequence and we're going to add Ada to it. I don't know why this is not working. Let's try that one more time. No. All right, I'm just going to sit on this one for a second and explain what we did in Unreal just a moment ago. We make a new level sequence. We take the Ada blueprint and we drop it inside, and that's going to give us a bunch of channels. And one of those channels is a control rig, which is built in a kind of magic way within Unreal based on that skeleton. But we're not driving that control rig. We're going to be driving the joints directly. So we delete that control rig, and then we apply in the animation track the animation that we brought in from Houdini. And imagine you seeing the Unreal viewport, and Ada is running just as she did in Houdini. It's exactly the same. So now we want to enhance the animation with KineFX. We want to really take advantage of some of those tools. So we have our original retargeted mocap. And what we can do is turn it into what's called a motion clip. And this is, I think, I'm just going to say it's a genuinely new and revolutionary thing in our industry, because we're going to take animation like that, and we're going to turn it into geometry. And so each of those skeletons represents a frame of time, but we're representing it now in geometry. And so now you can do geometry things to it, which is really, really cool. Like you could do anything you want with any of the geometry tools in Houdini. But what we're going to do is we're going to extract the locomotion of it. So now it's all sitting there at the origin, but it has this little red line indicating that it's moving forward. Pointing, pointing. And now we're going to cycle that. So we could cycle this as much as we want. And in fact, I cycled it, I think 5 times using the extracted locomotion. So essentially, we've extended the locomotion and then taken that in-place animation and kind of repeated it along that locomotion. And then I can use a retime node to trim. You can see when I put it on display, doot, it just took away some of those frames. So now you can extend an animation and trim it to exactly the length that you want. And then we're going to evaluate that motion clip, which means here's motion in geometry, and I want to evaluate that as animation. So it takes all that geometry and compresses it back into animation. So now we have a running character that's running much further than before, and then we export again, this time as a cycle, export that to disk, and now we can bring it back into Unreal in exactly the same way. So whether this video plays or not doesn't matter because we've seen it before. But let's see if it works. So again, we want to bring in that animation. And we've also added the cameras. We've exported the cameras from Houdini into Unreal so that we can just see the same angle. And we can see that these are, in fact, the same animations. So here we are grabbing that animation cycle. Again, targeting that MetaHuman-based skeleton is very important. Bringing it in. Now we have it as one of our assets. So here we go. Here's our animation that we had before. We're going to get rid of that. And now we're going to reapply the new cycled animation. Doot, like that. We are, I think, going to extend it because there's a much longer clip. We're going to change our camera here, I think, in a second to show that it's as long and from the same angle that we had in Houdini. So here's our camera, all the same. So it's very straightforward, but there are just these handful of little things that you have to watch out for. And that was our primary goal in going through this, is to find out what those gotchas were and how you could work around them. So next, we're going to add a ragdoll simulation. So we have our animation, and it's amazing, and we love it, but we would really love if Ada would fall down on her face for whatever reason. And so I've brought this animation in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the ragdoll tools that are derived almost directly from our crowd tools. And we've brought those up into a set of KineFX tools. So here we have our base skeleton. We're going to move all the way over here, and we're going to stash this pose in a rest transform attribute. We're going to use a rig mirror pose because it's going to create this mirror point attribute, and we're going to use that later. And these are the nodes that are going to do all the ragdoll. It's just 3 nodes. We've got a configure joint, a collision shapes, and a constraint. And then all of that gets packed up and goes into the solver. So the configure joints node is just a big list of select a joint and tell Houdini through this interface, how much can that joint rotate? Can it only rotate in one axis and by how much? Or can it rotate in all axes and by a lot? So you can see the little ones with orange squares on them. Those are ones that I've selected, like, select one. Go ahead and select it. There we go. And now you can see this little UI element is showing me how far that joint is allowed to rotate. And basically, how far are you allowed to rotate when the Ragdoll system bonks you and says, okay, push you over here. Well, if I push on the arm, I can only rotate just a little bit, because you don't want your characters to fall into a ball of spaghetti. You want them to maintain their integrity as characters. And so it's just a 20-minute process of going through and selecting each of these and deciding how much should they rotate and in what axes. And then the collision shapes takes the output of the configured joints and it uses this mirror point to basically, when we create a shape on one side, it'll create the shape on the other side. So it just saves us some time. And you can see immediately what these are. Basic capsule shapes that are associated with specific joints. And these are the things that are involved in our rigid body simulation. So it's these things that will bonk against each other and will hit the ground, or if you have a rock slide or something, these are the things that are going to react to that. And because they're associated with a joint, they're going to rotate those joints. And so a complex system, like this whole Ragdoll thing, in 3 nodes, essentially. And it takes a little bit of time, 20 minutes per node to select the right joints, to configure these shapes. The hand, I've just done like a kind of a big pizza shape, right? So I didn't go through and do all the fingers, but you could if you knew that you needed a hand to hit the ground and you needed that kind of deformation. And then this Ragdoll constraints node, you kind of don't do anything. You just take all of this information that you've created as attributes and said, Ragdoll constraints, figure it all out. And figure it out in a way that I can now feed into the Ragdoll solver that it understands. And so having done that, we click go and Ada just falls to the ground. Well, that's not really that exciting. And the Ragdoll solver has lots and lots of options for doing things like, where is it? Transitions. So when should Ada turn into a Ragdoll? Well, immediately is kind of lame. Why don't we do it on an object bounds? So we're going to select the pelvis, which you can see, and we have this collision geometry. It's just a big box. I think I templated here. Yeah, so there's a big box. And when Ada's pelvis joint enters this box, that's when the Ragdoll turns on. And there's lots of other options here that you can explore. But for the purposes of this demo, this is illustrative. So here she goes, everything's going well, and then suddenly it doesn't go well. So a Ragdoll simulation in really 45 minutes for this character. And now you can do all kinds of nonsense. All kinds of, she can fall off stuff, things can hit her in the head. The Ragdoll solver has lots of options for timing and for conditions in which she turns into a Ragdoll. You can use, here she goes, and boom. So really pretty good after having spent no time on any of these things. So the collision shapes, those could be much better. The collision, the joint angles could be more precise. So we're going to export this animation. And again, we're just visualizing it with the mesh here because we're going to drive the mesh in Unreal. But I'll just mention in the solver itself, it has another interesting set of parameters. You can't see them here, but it's called motors. And a motor, this is a great trivia for any of you film buffs. The movie Temple of Doom, if you remember the scene where Indiana Jones cuts the bridge and it falls down and all the bad guys fall into the river, they built dummies, like sort of human-sized mannequins, and they actually put motors in their joints. And the motors just made them do this. And it helped get that movie the first PG-13 rating because it was, really realistic. And it was just, if you watch the scene, it's a 2-second shot, but you can see these guys flailing their arms. And so we've inherited this idea of motors. And the way that we achieve that is that the animation that she has now can be used as an influence on the ragdoll simulation. And if you crank it way up, the ragdoll kind of won't do anything. She'll fall over and just be running like flat on the ground because the motors are so strong. But if you turn on the motors just a little bit, then as she falls, it's not like somebody just turned off her brain and she collapsed. It will be like she's, and her arms will move and her legs will move a little bit. And it really makes it really effective. So lots to explore in the Ragdoll solver. But let's go back to Unreal. And I hope this plays. There we go. So again, exactly the same workflow. We don't have to really do anything different because all we're bringing in is this new animation skeleton. So we name it correctly or point it correctly to the base skeleton. We bring it in. It's here with our other animation. And it's compressing. Now we're back in our sequence editor. We can put that animation onto Ada. And you'll see her fall over in real time. So we adjust the animation range, change up the camera. And there we go. Oh, clunk. So you can see at the end there, her face goes through the floor. It's because the collision shapes, weren't as good as they could have been if I'd spent a little bit more time. But you can obviously see a huge amount of work can get done in Houdini to feed, your real time. Now, whether this is for a cinematic or a game, you might imagine that there are hundreds of animators, working away, creating falling down animations or getting bonked by a thing animations. But if they could leverage Houdini, you could feed, because Houdini is procedural, you could just create dozens and dozens and dozens of falling, falling on uneven ground, falling on rocks, falling in, into a tree. Who knows what people have in their games these days? And just crank away, just throw that all on a server and let the computer do all the work. And now you have this giant repository of animations that are dynamic and are interesting, that are interactive in the world, that you can just bring in and play via triggering in Unreal. So it's amazing. It's a really cool and very easy workflow. I'm very excited about it, I don't know if you could tell. But we can push KineFX a little further in its association with Unreal because we have these integrations. And here's just an example of the top left is a mocap system that I can't remember the name of, XNs, I think. On the right is Houdini, and this is live. And then down at the bottom, that's Fianna, who's jumping over a thing, jumping over her laptop, which is probably not a smart thing to do. Kick it accidentally. But this is all running live real time. We have a connection to Unreal as well. So if you wanted to do things in this manner through Houdini into Unreal, that's a possibility as well. And we're only sort of scratching the surface of the kinds of things that we want to do and our customers are asking us for. So if you have a course in a school that's even just playing with these things to give students a sense of what they're like, Houdini can be a part of that. And we think that it should be. And to sort of finish up, here is a animation, ragdoll animation. And here is our ragdoll, who's just clunk, kerclunk. And we can blend that with keyframe animation. So the blue is the ragdoll, and the green is keyframe animation by an animator. And in the KineFX toolset, we can blend those together to get a final result. So animated, ragdoll, animated. And it's all just blended because what we've done is we've taken each piece of this animation, made it into a motion clip, and then the motion clip tools allow us to blend these things, trim them, do all sorts of things, and then export as a final result. So KineFX, amazing. MetaHumans, amazing. This presentation, amazing. Because it combines two amazing things. And just as a final little bit of fun, you've probably seen this on our website already. So this is using all of these techniques, including secondary motion tools in the KineFX library. So his ears, his trunk, and his tail. None of that is animated. It's just a secondary motion, inheriting motion from other aspects and wiggling those things around. So he falls with the Ragdoll solver. We're blending all of these animations together. And there is an entire series on the website covering the entire creation of this animation. I highly recommend checking it out. There's a rigging video, a Ragdoll video, a something else video, and another video. So there's lots to see there, and they're only about 20 minutes long, and they give you a nice overview of all of these tools. And of course, if this elephant were in fact a MetaHuman that you've imported, you'd then be able to very knowingly export that back out to Unreal and know that you're going to get this kind of a result. And I think that is it. So Ada and I thank you very much. So I'm open to questions. Oh, I zipped through that. I think the video I skipped was like 5 minutes long. That's why we have more time.
That mocap stream SOP,
Yes.
does the mocap you bring in, I mean, you can get mocap from all these different places now. Does the rig have to be standard?
The mocap stream SOP has, I think, 5 options right now. There's like XNs and 4 others that I can't remember. But it has multiple options, and there is also dedicated, what's the ASF? Who is that one? Is that Viacom?
I'm not sure.
There's a couple of other SOPs that one is called the mocap import SOP, and that will also import, I think, the Vicon stuff and like BVH. But the motion import SOP has multiple options.
Cool.
And if a new company comes along or whatever, and we say, hey, you know, how do we make a thing for your thing? And if they tell us, we'll do it for sure.
Nice.
But yeah, check the options on it.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, KineFX is really, you know, it's one thing for someone to say, oh, this is a really exciting feature set, but it's actually really exciting.
Yeah.
Because it opens up so many doors. And one of the things that we should probably skip some of the stuff in this and add more, you know, KineFX stuff. But inside the Ragdoll solver itself, if you double click it, you'll go into what's called a dive target, and you can add pop forces. So any of the particle pops, like wind and drag and speed limit, and you know, get velocity from a volume. So if you have a pyro explosion, you can go get the velocities from that and use that to push your joints around, which I think would be insane in any other application to do in literally one node. So you could have a character walking, being blown to the side, and the Ragdoll would kind of react to that, or the secondary motion SOPs would react. So the tail would whip around, or it's really, that's only scratching the surface. We're really very excited by it. And I'm
wonderful.
I'd answer any questions you have, even about MetaHumans. Oh, the Zoic people, of course. Go ahead.
On the joint deform node,
yep.
Does that require you to have weights on there? Like when you use it on there, was it pulling the weights from the model? Or?
It was pulling the weights from the MetaHuman.
Okay.
Because that mesh had weights on it.
Got it. Yeah, that was my question.
But if your character didn't have weights, the joints would move, but the character wouldn't.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. I keep hearing sort of the idea that KineFX can do all sorts of really interesting rigging.
Right.
I've seen like one of those snake things that kind of rotates on, like made out of little triangular prisms that unravels.
Right.
What's the most interesting rig you've seen or come across from a client that's using this? Have you come across anything specifically cool?
No. But that's more to do with, maybe the devs have, like the character team may have seen rigs that for whatever reason had weird issues and that were really weird. I know that we've done in the past, just in the education department, we did a kind of an experiment where we had a speed tree and we extracted like the central line from it and we rigged that in KineFX. And so you could have this sort of global animation. You could whip the tree back and forth, and then we fed that into a vellum solver, so all the leaves and stuff would wiggle around. And then I think in one of the courses that I've done, I think the Ragdoll one, I took a standard L system, and with one node you can turn the L system into a rig. Mm-hmm. Right? It doesn't have fancy controls on it, but it's a skeleton. Right. And then I think I copied spheres onto it and I made it into a bush and made it into a piece of like a ragdoll. So if anyone's doing crowds and wants vegetation, an idea that I would love to see somebody really take and run is to take your bushes and small trees and make them agents in the crowd system, because now you can instance them. You can have millions of them if you want, and if you have a character that also has a collision shape, that character can run through those bushes, and those bushes will react to that, and it's all for free, and it's all really genuinely very fast. So that's, I think, initially some of the more interesting things.
And just a quick follow-up on what you were saying about like a pop system influencing secondary motion and stuff. That takes into account the hierarchy of the rig as well.
That's the benefit of it,
right? Is
that the Ragdoll solver is the thing that's saying, give me all the information, give me the joints, give me their hierarchy, give me their limits and collision. But also, if you are now influencing the solver with other velocities or manipulating the velocity with a drag node, I will work that out. And the Ada falling over, it can look very mechanical, like her head pops off and she just sort of clunks down on the ground. Just adding a drag node it changes her behavior in just such a subtle way that it looks way more believable. And so having those pop tools, and really the fact that joints are points, and therefore you can do anything you want. And there's lots of ways that you can break, you can say, okay, they're points, so I'm going to do all kinds of crazy things. And that you do something so crazy that it doesn't work as a skeleton anymore. There are tools that will say, okay, you've gone crazy, but we still can recognize these joints, and we can fix them so that they're joints again, and that's still a skeleton. And so that's really powerful, because you can do things like, if you have a crowd system, or if you have a character that gets an arm cut off, like zombies that you want to hack to pieces, doing it in KineFX, you're dealing with points. And the little lines between the joints, it's just a primitive line. So delete it, and now you have an arm that's not attached to a chest anymore. So that kind of flexibility, and I don't want to rag on any other application, but I don't like the idea of thinking about doing that kind of thing in other applications. It feels much more comfortable and easy in KineFX. So that's part of the excitement that we have.
So to that point about using it in a crowd system, would you need to unpack in order to get secondary and tertiary interaction for a collision example?
Well, I think I'm mixing two things. In the Ragdoll solver in SOPs, in the KineFX workflow, the dive target is basically a place to put pops. If you wanted to do that in a crowd, I think that the workflow would be different. But the Ragdoll is almost entirely an agent. You know, they're very, very close. And it wouldn't surprise me if they got even closer over time so that you could have that kind of, you know, back and forth without thinking about it.
Right.
But I would hesitate to say that the workflow would be the same for crowds. It might be slightly different. I think, though, I don't know if anyone else, John or Peter, I think that you can use pop forces in the crowd solver, like directly, like just put down a pop something.
And you would query it by the ID of the point itself?
You would just grab the velocities and use those velocities. Like, I think that there are crowd nodes that accept certain attributes and will say, okay, I'll try and solve this differently based on these attributes. And it might be also true that the agent might be intelligent enough to say, oh, you're giving me different velocities, you know, wind or whatever. It's worth exploring.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're not running into any rotation issues going back and forth, round tripping from Unreal to Houdini, very quaternion rotation.
Not yet.
Okay.
No. I think because the animation that we're exporting works. You know, it's not like a black box where, oh, maybe it'll work. It is just FBX animation. Identical to something that you'd get from Mixamo or out of Unreal itself. And the FBX conversion, you know, we've rewritten the FBX exporter a few times in the past couple of years to really to make sure that these things are as one-to-one as we can. So no, I haven't heard of even customers having problems. So.
And the last question.
Sure.
You did a bit of localization. You're restricting your character to the origin. Basically, you're localizing to their translation space.
Yeah.
Or you could do it to camera space as well. But is there a node that does something similar? If you have a world space travel and you want to localize to the origin?
Yep. Extract locomotion.
Okay.
So what you do is you feed in this piece of animation, and you tell the extract locomotion SOP which joint should I use to determine locomotion. And I think in this we use the pelvis. And what it does is it takes the pelvis, finds its motion in the world, and then just smacks it down to the ground as that red line. And now you have just a character running in place, and you have this locomotion, and that would be curved or whatever the motion was.
And presumably, if you carry the camera into the equation, you could also say the camera's fixed position is relative to the pelvis, so the camera travels.
Maybe? I think so, yeah.
Because if you're doing local simulation or simulation in local space, you don't want to adversely substep too much because you're wasting. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Anyone else? Ooh, over there.
Hello. I'm curious. I've done some research on KineFX and like the tutorials you guys have online and the Houdini website and things like that.
This is not a gotcha question.
No.
Okay.
It's no. I see a lot of stuff being done with motion capture and altering motion capture, and it's really amazing stuff. I'm curious if KineFX is conducive to creating like a full-blown character rig with 4-character performance, and if you is for hand-keyed animation specifically.
Right. In the tutorial or it's not really a tutorial, it's more of a project overview about the elephant that is online. There is a rigging, like a straight up, I'm in a rig, I'm going to create controls, how to do that. And then there is an animation video about how to animate that rig. So yes, you can do traditional animation for sure. And the tool set that we initially targeted was retargeting. So that's where we put most of our work initially. 19 and 19.5 have more sort of traditional animation. 20 will have a lot more. We're really going to focus in on, here's a mesh, rig it, give it to an animator who is just a traditional person who wants to just do a walk cycle or whatever. So that includes animation editor updates, viewport updates, lots of those kinds of things that animators rely on.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's something I'm
So go to the
forward
website and look for that elephant. I can't remember. Maybe ask Rob McGee. He might remember the name of because I think it's gone beyond our front page, but it is there and it's worth looking at.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, what now? Yes, yeah, it was Warren, Mitnia, and Esther who did that. Really, really cool. Lots of little details that we kind of skip over in these kind of presentations. It's really well worth it. Yeah.
Are there more questions? This has been an excellent Q&A session.
It's a good thing I skipped that video.
Yeah, yeah.
Lots of time. But I'll say, I guess, just to finish up, Houdini is not really known for straight up traditional character animation, and KineFX, I think, changes that. We don't have the bells and whistles and the depth of the tool set, but that is going to change. So if you're interested in Houdini already, or if you're just thinking about it because you don't want to use something else, it's worth getting into it right now, because there's visual effects benefits, but there are also animation benefits that are coming. And obviously retargeting, this kind of ragdoll stuff, it's all worth it, I think. I'm biased, but.
Unfortunately, I missed the presentation, but I was hoping I would be able to ask you how USDs have been used in conjunction with KineFX. 'Cause I've had
we're kind of at the mercy of the USD group, Pixar. They've been initially, and this isn't telling tales out of school, but some of the earliest conversations that we had with them, and they were thinking, well, we're not going to support USD scale at all, right? They weren't interested. And so it's been, people are everyone else is no, we have to start supporting characters in some way. I think the problem, if you know the problems of materials, like Material X doesn't have a ramp. What? So we built a ramp and we've given it to the Material X people, implement this. You can imagine the conversations around constraints and things like that, when we can't even agree right now on, joints and a hierarchy. I think inevitably it'll come, but right now I wouldn't look at USD for character work. Keep an eye out, of course.
even now, I noticed that the skeleton, I think, whatever that hierarchical data set is accessible the same way you might with an FBX.
Yeah, I think USD scale does work. You can export a skeleton.
Yeah.
But if you're doing that, if you have a good reason to use USD for that, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, just use FBX, because there's going to be so many other tools that know about FBX, and Unreal's implementation of USD right now is very, very minimal. So you're not really going to benefit from it at the moment, but certainly next year, year after.
Oh, we have one more here.
Sort of a follow-up about the traditional animation question. When you are animating with controls and stuff the more classic way, can you still use the ragdoll type nodes and things? And can you bake that as animation that can then be edited?
If this will play, this blue guy is ragdoll, right? And so the workflow here is to say, okay, here's my ragdoll simulation. I know that before he falls into a pile of spaghetti, I want to transition into something, useful. And so the green one is keyframed. So the animator took the pose up top and probably just moved the character down until he got a matching pose of that sort of last frame, not the last frame, but the middle frame for the blue guy, kind of matched that together. And then say, this is my start. I'm going to animate out from here. So now you have two animations, the blue and the green. which is all keyframe. The green is all like hand keyframed traditional animation. Then turning those both into motion clips, which is that animation in geometry. And now it's geometry. So you can cut and paste. Like motion clips will allow, if you have two characters one is just walking normally and one is walking waving, you can cut the top off the waving guy and just add it to the other guy, right? It's geometry. And so that's what was done here. They used motion clips and just a motion sequence SOP, I think. So move from blue to green with a little bit of overlap and blend. And there you go. Now you have a single piece of animation. So you can absolutely move back and forth. It does involve a sort of moving to this motion clip idea, but if that's what gets the job done.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. I think that's maybe it.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you everybody for a great day one.